January is the month of red in the Western Cape. Plants from different families paint the landscape bright red in an almost synchronized manner. From the sun-baked succulents between the rocks to the waterfalls in the kloofs, these plants are all too eager to showcase their brilliantly red flowers at the height of summer. What is responsible for this scarlet display? For many it may seem as a coincidence. However, these plants might just be catering for an exclusive pollinator, which simply cannot resist all things red. So for me, this Harveya seems like it's just blending in to its surroundings. The same color scheme all over. But for most people, it looks quite different. This screams, "Look at me." And then people can see it from far away to hurry and identify it. But unfortunately, I need some help because for me, I look more at textures of flowers. And that is what triggers my eye to look at the flowers, not the color. And the reason that is because I'm actually colorblind. So a lot of color schemes blend as one for me. So red becomes green in the landscape. And if it's not for the very strange texture in that landscape, I can't see it. And that's the same for me with blue and purple and pink. So when I go plant hunting, it's always great to have some botanist friends with me to help me find those special flowers. That is right in my face, but I would maybe just walk past. And to botanize in groups, it's not just for me for the color, but it's also nice to have some botanizing plant friends with me. Because I don't know everything, they don't know everything, so we help each other in identifying plants. And if there's something that we don't know, we might know a friend that do. One has to drive and one has to look out for some interesting things next to the road. And that's where Tristan comes in. The Cape has provided so many bulb varieties to the world's horticultural industry. And one of those is Certanthus. Certanthus, certos, meaning curved, anthos meaning flower, curved flower. Isn't that just a perfect description of Certanthus? This is Certanthus angustifolius. Interesting thing about Certanthus is that they are called the fire lily, and that's for a reason, because they love flowering after a fire. Certanthus ventricosus, which is the brother of this one, flowers only 9 days after a fire went through. It's also red in color because that's the color that sunbirds and sugarbirds love, and it attracts them from far and wide. This one grows here on the slopes of the Swartberg. It's still wet, but in winter this can be really, really cold and full of snow. Another fact about Certanthus is that after the fire, the shrubbery around it will start to grow. And it might be another 10 to 15 years before a fire would go through. And in that period of time, this Certanthus won't get any sunlight. So its bulb is going to stay underground for many years until that spark is lit. So upon hiking the mountain, Tristan saw in the distance a bit of red. Now we are looking for a specific flower which is bright red at the moment. I'm struggling to see it. So we took a bit of a gamble, walked up the ravine, very, very tense. But upon arrival, it's exactly what we were looking for. And what a show awaited us. This is the New Year's lily. It is such a spectacular show. It's a show that not a lot of people see because it's so hidden away, and they only grow in very specific areas for very specific reasons. Its Latin name is Gladiolus cardinalis. Gladiolus comes from the word little sword, Little sword, meaning it's shaped like a sword. Like the gladiators would fight with those swords, it's the same kind of shape. That's where the name comes from. Cardinalis, a cardinal's cap. Those red pointy caps that the cardinals wear. And it looks exactly like it. Gladiolus cardinalis is the gladiolus that's been used to create all those beautiful bright shades of color that's used all around the world to create those hybrids that we have in our gardens. But this gladiolus is different to all the other gladiolus. Now in the Western Cape we have about 110 different species of gladiolus. There are a lot of spectacular ones, but this one is my favorite. But it's different. And it's obvious to see what is the difference between this one and the rest that's growing on the mountain. It's growing in a waterfall. It's quite clever in doing so, because this area is full of baboons and they love gladiolus bulbs. So this guy thought, no, I'm not going where I'm vulnerable, I'm going where baboons do not wander. And the only place they could find, and it's very clever, is inside a waterfall, in the cracks between the rocks, in a raging waterfall. But there's also a certain amount of danger associated with growing here. If we have a huge downpour, that immense force of the water could rip the gladiolus right out of its crevices on the waterfall. But the plus point, or the rewards that they get from this dangerous spot that they chose to grow, still outweighs the dangers that lures with it. Gladiolus cardinalis can get up to 1 meter long, and the colonies can be vast. This is one of the biggest colonies I've seen. The color is bright red, because at the moment its pollinator is only looking for it. It's its favorite color. So anything that's red, its pollinator would be attracted to. Even if you have a red cap on your head, that pollinator might visit you. And that is the mountain pride butterfly. So the mountain pride butterfly is not plant specific. It visits everything that's red. But the plants are more clever. They know that butterfly is out now, so most of the flowers flowering up here, especially close to the water sources, are red in color and the same shade of red, like the Disa uniflora and some of the Crassulas, even Certanthus. So the red color of the gladiolus is not the only contributor to attract its pollinator. The flowers are almost dusted with glitter. It's got an iridescence to it. And that causes the flower to be visible for up to 1 kilometer away. And that glitter on the petals of the flower reflects the sun's intense light. And that is its secret, to be seen from far away for anybody that's not colorblind. So the iridescents shine far away and the red is reflected for miles, literally. The butterflies see it and come to the waterfall to drink some nectar. There's not a lot of flowers out at the moment, so it needs to capitalize on whatever flower is open now. The mountain pride butterfly's proboscis is exactly the length of the tube of this gladiolus. And by drinking the water, it would shave pollen onto its head, like I've done there. This pollen is not brightly colored. It doesn't need to be brightly colored. And the butterfly would fly off to the next flower, hopefully on a different plant, and that pollen would rub off on the female parts of the next flower. And so it would continue. And once pollination has happened, the flower does not need to exert more energy, and so it will start to wither away and seed will start to form. It will fall into the waterfall and a new baby will hopefully set root in the next waterfall. What's incredible to me is how this gladiolus got to be on these steep waterfalls in the first place. Now its seed are very light and will drift on the water and be taken downstream. But that is where algae and moss is so important in our waterways, because the algae and the moss collects on rocks or in crevices, and that builds up debris, little bits of dust, sand, sticks, stones and leaves, and it holds it. And that barrier that it creates is the perfect place for a gladiolus seed to get stuck. And if there's a rock with a crevice, the gladiolus would have found its perfect spot to shed its root deep into the crevice of the rocks and wedge itself in. And there it will take root and a new colony will form. Plants never cease to amaze me. If you look at the gladiolus in this waterfall, they're in flower now. Yes, their pollinator is also out now, so that's a reason for them to be in flower too. But if they were in flower 3 months ago, when it was raining and all the water was flowing down the mountains, and this waterfall would have been a raging torrent of water. And if it flowered then, all its flowers would have been damaged almost instantly. So the plant knows that this is the dry time. Although it's in water, it's damp throughout the year, it still knows when is the correct time, when the water is at its lowest, so that its flowers would not be damaged. Even its leaves are shaped to let the water run down as quickly as possible. Because when that torrents of water come during the winter time, the plant needs to let it go off very quickly. If there's any friction on the leaves would surely break. Not only is the timing of the flowers very apt for when the stream is at its lowest, also the seed dispersal. Now, if this river was in flood, the seed would not find a slow enough current to be able to attach itself to a bit of moss or a bit of debris in the stream. It would just be all washed away and in the end land in the sea. So the timing for this gladiolus, because of its choice of habitat, is so vital. Although Gladiolus cardinalis is such a spectacular sight and the red is stunningly bright, there's another red flower out at the moment, and it's after the same pollinator as the New Year's lily. And that flower attracts people from all over the world to come and photograph it. And for us to find that flower, we need to travel right on the verge of a big city. People come from far and wide to visit this flower. This is an orchid, and these are uniflora. Probably one of South Africa's most famous orchids. Surely one of the most famous flowers in the Cape Peninsula must be this. Yes, we think about the king protea and we think about some other flowers, but people come from far and wide to visit this flower. This is an orchid, and these are uniflora. Probably one of South Africa's most famous orchids and one of the biggest ground orchids in terms of size of the flower. It flowers right in the middle of the driest and hottest part of the summer. And there's a reason for that, because its pollinator only are active in this time. And that is also where the color comes in. There are a lot of scarlet colored flowers in flower at the moment on top of the mountain. And they're all pollinated by the same pollinator, which is the mountain pride butterfly. The Crassulas and the gladiolus are already out, but they're starting to wither away. The flowers have been pollinated and they're starting to close. But the Diza is the last and the most dramatic one to open. And they're usually in full flower on Valentine's Day. So we have a lot of tourists walking up Table Mountain, and on Valentine's Day they would come and visit these gorgeous Dizas in full flower. Diza uniflora has some very specific growing conditions that it requires. And the most important of that is clean water. A Diza will not grow if there's any kind of chemical in the water. The roots always have to be moist, and they like facing the sun. Diza uniflora. Uniflora meaning one flower, one single flower. And when they named this plant, it was perceived that one plant will only make one individual flower. But we know now that that's false, as we see a lot of the stalks do have more than one flower. Now, upon flowering and finishing that cycle, the mother plant withers away, but not before she makes a new pup for next year. There's another interesting fact of how Dizas got their name, Diza. Now, Bergius was this plant guy, and when he wanted to name this Diza, he looked at the flower and something seemed familiar to him. And he thought about how Queen Diza presented herself to the king with a fishnet. And that fishnet pattern is very prevalent in the top petal of the flower. And in some colonies, those patterns are more bold, and in some colonies on other mountains, they're more subdued. Even the color of the flower changes. There have been some yellow ones found, some really dark red ones, to a light pink, even with an orange tint to it. As with all orchids, their mechanism of being pollinated is different to other flowers. When the pollinator, which is the mountain pride butterfly, visits the flower, who is attracted to the bright red color, which also has that iridescence, like some of the other red flowers in flower now. It lands on the flower, and upon doing so, its head touches the male part of the flower, and that gets deposited and sticks to his front head. It flies off to another flower, and that little adaptation that he has now on his front head swings around and touches the female part of the next plant's flower. And so pollination happens. He might do that quite a few times, so there's a lot of pollen in that sac. So it's a big gamble for this plant because it relies on that butterfly to do its job, because all its pollen, it only has 2 sacs, gets deposited on that butterfly. This is one of Table Mountain's most prominent plants. It's such an elegant orchid. This orchid has been used around the world for orchid shows and plant enthusiasts alike. It's an orchid we can be very proud of. It's an emblem for hiking clubs, garden clubs, or even parts of the Western Cape. It's a plant that contributes a lot to our Fynbos kingdom and make our Fynbos kingdom more prominent on the world stage. Another plant that's using red to its advantage is Crassula coccinea. Crassula coccinea has this bright red color, and what's unique about this plant, it's growing on rocky outcrops. There's almost nothing here, so the red is even more amplified to attract the mountain pride butterfly. The mountain pride butterfly's proboscis is again the same length as the tube in the coccinea flower. It's about the only insect that can drink or get to the nectar there. And upon doing so, it pollinates the flower. Crassula comes from the Latin word crassus, and that means thick and fleshy, as you can see with its stem and its leaves. They do like these rocky outcrops, and that means that leaves have to be fleshy because they need to store some moisture during January and February where it's so hot and dry. Coccinea comes from the Greek word kokos, and kokos is from the red scarlet oak, and the red berries on that oak was used to make a beautiful red dye, and that red dye is the same color as the flower of this Crassula. The soil where Crassula grows is not very rich. It needs a bit of moss to congregate and gives it a bit of protection against the sun for its roots. It's mostly sandy, it's just weathered sandstone, not a lot of nutrients and also not a lot of moisture that can be held by it. And that's why moss is so important on these sandstone rocky outcrops. It makes seed. The seed's very light and will be carried by either wind or water all over the place to get germinated. But it needs that moss to find its home. But not only that, wind can also break the branches and cuttings will callus and roots will form, and so new plants can also develop. Crassula is also used worldwide as pot plants in houses. They're quite versatile. They can take a fair amount of moisture because when in winter time the rainy season arrives, it's soaking wet here, and where this one is growing in seemingly zero moisture, this would be a deep pond. They can also take a fair amount of shade. That's why they're so popular in shops and they last long in little pots as pot plants in kitchens. We have a lot of Crassulas in southern Africa. This is not a commercially viable one because the leaves are not that spectacular. But when it comes to the flowers, I think this one is tops. Evolution is an interesting factor. Time changes everything. Time puts everything in perspective. And when it comes to the red color and the prominence of red during the hottest time in the Cape, how did that happen? It's kind of, for me, it's like the chicken and the egg. Did the Crassulas and the gladiolas and the dizas, all these scarlet red colors, evolve first to get the mountain pride butterfly to pollinate them? Or did the mountain pride butterfly evolve to be active now, to be emerged in this feast of nectar during the dry times? I don't know. And the Crassulas could have been light pink in the beginning. But selection and plants that are being pollinated, maybe the darker ones, the darker red color they became, they got more pollinated by the pollinator, and so they are now the survival species at the moment, all scarlet red. It's an interesting fact, and that is a part of nature that never stops. It's still going on all around us. This is just one of the more obvious examples that we can see on a hike here on the mountains. How the redness of this color, the scarlet beautiful color, plays along with a pollinator, a certain pollinator that only loves this color. But then the species of the plants are so different. One is an orchid, one is a bulb, and one is a succulent. All intertwined for the same goal. In the next episode, we will discover the secrets of the Tsitsikamma forest, walking amongst the giants to find some of South Africa's most unique plant species, right at the eastern edge of the Cape Floral Kingdom.